Welcome to the Data Leadership Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony J. Algman. Data is everywhere in our businesses, and it takes leadership to make the most of it. We bring you the people, stories, and lessons to help you become a data leader. We've partnered with Dataversity to provide listeners with 20% off your first training center purchase with promo code ALGMANDL. Go to dataleadershiptraining.com to learn more. Today, we welcome Ron Carucci. Ron is the co-founder and managing partner at Navalent, working with CEOs and executives pursuing transformational change for their organizations, leaders, and industries. He has a 30-year track record helping executives tackle challenges of strategy, organization, and leadership. He's the author of 9 books, including the Amazon #1, Rising to Power, and the recently released To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. He contributes to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and is a 2-time TEDx speaker. Ron, welcome to the show.
Anthony, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we just start off, take a few minutes and give us a little bit of backstory on your career and kind of all these things that led up to your work with Navalent, which you've obviously been doing for quite a while, and 9 books, which we will definitely talk about because I am in awe of anyone who can write more than 1 book, because I did one and I'm like, nope, never again, not doing it. So we'll cover that in a little bit, but let's understand your background and we'll kind of take it from there.
Well, I've been doing at this for a long time, 30 plus years, working with organizations. And I think, as a kid, I was always fascinated by the organization of human endeavor. I always thought it was fascinating that you could bring people together to do something that they couldn't do on their own. And so I was always the one, whether it was organizing a local stickball game or helping with a school event or teams, it was just always been a natural fascination for me, which I think led me to my work in organizations. And I spent most of my early career inside big organizations, trying to do the same kind of work. I learned that there's a whole set of political skills that you needed to have to do this work as an insider, which I fantastically lacked. And so, upon a very impressive collection of severance packages, began to realize, if I'm going to have to live out my passion for organizations, is probably going to have to be by not being part of one. And so left and joined the consulting world and then realized, gosh, the same behaviors that got me in trouble inside get me paid really well outside. So I think this is probably the better place to do this work from. And spent some years with 8 or 9 years with a wonderful consulting firm in New York City. And then a few of us left and started Navalent 17 years ago.
And Navalent's, a known organization. This is a company that's grown quite a bit. Could you talk about what that journey has been like in being part of a founding team in the entrepreneurial side of consulting, growing a business in consulting? Do you even get to do the work that you love to do while you're building a business to do the work that you love?
Well, and that's been a great conundrum for us, because when we left, we love, those of us who left to start Navalent love this work. We are passionate about the art and science of leadership and change and organizational systems. And so we never said, let's go start a firm. We never said, let's go grow a firm. We said, let's go do this work together because we love each other and we love this work, and that changes the work. But over time, we realized we needed capacity. And so we've ebbed and flowed in capacity, both with employees or an affiliate network. But we've never given up the work ourselves because that's what we love. None of us ever wanted to run a firm. We were the most accidental entrepreneurs there ever were. And so it's always been a conundrum for capacity and scaling, because we can scale what we do in terms of replicating the skill set, replicating the kinds of relationships you build, replicating the kinds of data we pride ourselves on collecting. But we don't want to leave that hundreds of people. So we've always been a boutique firm because this was built for us.
So, and clearly now much of your career is around thought leadership and the content that you're creating through the written word, especially, but in speaking and all of that. Can you rewind back to when you first decided, I'm going to write and create that first book, or start doing that, because you create this kind of leverage by doing these things that you're teaching others how to do them, and they're going to be able to take and amplify what you would be able to do just directly one-on-one consulting or coaching an executive team. I want to understand, what was it like at the beginning and what is it like now? And is it the same or different, or what have you learned through becoming as prolific as you've been in creating all of this work?
So what I can say, Anthony, is I was, when I started writing 22 years ago, it wasn't really with the intention of being a thought leader, or that with any understanding of thought leadership leading to broaden my consulting work. It was because my clients had problems, or I was seeing problems in the world for which I had no answers, and so writing for me is a way of learning. It's a way to go out and sort of immerse myself into questions that clients may ask me one day, and I want to be able to answer them. It wasn't really until surprisingly, only about 6 years ago that I began to realize, wow. And I think on the heels of a desperately proliferating marketplace of, just oodles and oodles of people running onto the field to play as consultants and coaches. I mean, you can go to JCPenney and get certified as a coach now. Like that's how badly credentialed and badly prepared many of these practitioners are. But the problem is that's now the defined marketplace. It's no longer the marketplace that I began my career in. Different set of rules, different set of selection criteria from a very far less informed buying set. So we had a phenomenal network of clients and executives and CEOs who either referred us or took us along with them when they changed companies. But many of mine were beginning to exit. I didn't have a fresh set behind them. So I had to realize that I had to rebuild that pipeline of relationships in a very different way. And so I thought, okay, I will use thought leadership to do that. The problem is I had no idea what to do. I mean, and I thought I did. Not only did I not know what to do, I was really clueless. The things that I thought I should do were actually the opposite of what I should do. So I hired a coach for me. I decided I need to take my own medicine and get help in this. And that's when I realized that, thought leadership can be an extremely powerful tool as a way to differentiate and invite people whose ideas, whose needs will match your ideas. And began that journey only 6 years ago. So the platform that I have now is not a career-long platform. And I'm still learning every day. I still don't, I'm still skinning my knees and figuring out what it means to, what the daggum Amazon algorithms are and how to, try and maneuver them. So it is a very powerful tool that, basically you have to reverse engineer practice to wisdom, right? You have to look at the patterns you're seeing in the world and come back with, okay, what are the universal principles that others might benefit from if I were to try and share them? From a data point of view, what's interesting, these last two books were based on a 10-year and a 15-year longitudinal study of, one was 2,700 interviews and this last one was 3,200 interviews. I knew we were sitting on a Rembrandt in the attic, this extraordinary set of data over the last 15, 20 years that now with the dawn of AI and big data technologies, you can actually mine that data for wisdom and insights. And so we did. For both longitudinal studies, we actually, went back to our own treasure trove of insights or of collected diagnostic data and extracted extraordinarily powerful predictors of behavior and performance, and with very compelling, evidence around. In the case of this last book, to be honest, under what conditions people will tell the truth and behave fairly and serve a greater good, and under what conditions they'll lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first. So, data has played a profoundly foundational role in, how we do our work.
And folks, like, this is why we don't delete data. This is why we hold on to this stuff, because you don't know how the opportunities are going to manifest down the road, and capabilities like what we have today weren't even predicted. Like we maybe had a notion that we were going to be able to do something like this someday, but like how we would actually put it to use, you can't always think about that when you're collecting and saving some of this data. It's not to say you should save everything, but like something that is as rich and unique as interviews that have been taking place over decade plus, there's some value in that, and it just may not yet be ready. It may not be ripe for the analysis because the tools haven't caught up. But these days, there's a lot more capabilities than we once had. Not in too far distant of a past. It's really amazing to see how much more we can get out of data that's been existing for quite some time. I'd like to ask you, because I want to spend most of the time talking about your work in thought leadership, but on the consulting side, I just have one more kind of. I'm curious in your experience, having done consulting for a long time and having had like a generational shift in your client base, like, and how you've had to kind of reform how you went to market and continue to grow those relationships and that business. One complaint I've had from consultants that I know and have talked to on this show, one of the challenges is often like in consulting, while you get to understand how it should be done and can coach how it should be done, sometimes it can be frustrating that you don't get to see it all the way through, or that clients may know exactly what they need to do and are for whatever reason unable to execute, either due to resources or to changing circumstances or what have you. Do you share that kind of frustration from, sometimes feeling like you've got great ideas that just can't be implemented? Or how do you overcome that and make as big of an impact as possible through the work that you do in your consultative practices?
Well, I think, there's no point in being frustrated over it, right? I think, the world today is producing insights and information and data and, perspectives at a far greater alarming rate than anybody could ever absorb them. So if any consultant feels like a level of pride of authorship over, why aren't you listening to me? You shouldn't be in this field. If you have a need to have your advice solicited or heard, you shouldn't be advising anybody. Because you're just doing it for the wrong reasons. Sure, we should all be rewarded with psychic energy for knowing that we've made a difference, or that an idea or perspective we've shared, helped change the course of somebody's decision-making or career. But if that's the outcome you're looking for, so you just have to recognize that you're the side of the table that you're on, right? You're both on the opposite side of the table from your clients as well as sitting next to them. And you have to hold that duality all the time. I have to often gauge when I'm with my clients, when suddenly a pattern will appear or a perspective will appear or dots will connect for me. I have to first calculate how many conversations away am I from them being ready to hear this. Because if we just blurt out ideas or we share them indiscriminately, or we're so impressed with them that we just, vomit them on our clients without tilling the ground, without earning our right, without making sure the trust base is there, then we're just, smart technicians. And that's not what we're hired for. If you really are in the business of being a trusted advisor, and trusted being the key word, you have to build the relationship and the connection to those leaders that allows you the right to, think about the kinds of perspectives or ideas you would share. But most importantly, when you would share them. I learned through many mistakes early in my career that having a really profound insight about a client doesn't mean it's time to tell them that you have that insight. Now, we begin we bust down a lot of walls in the very beginning just by how we do our diagnostic. We extract data and perspectives and insights at the beginning of every. It's like an MRI of the organization, And so we come back with a client hears everything we heard. We don't filter it. We code it. The data is coded, but every voice you've sent out of the room is coming back in the room, and you're going to hear everything we heard. You won't know who said it, but you get 80, 90, 100, 120 pages of narrative back. And it's forced listening, right? You get to listen to the heart sets and mindsets and frustrations and dueling narratives of the organization you're leading about each other, about you, about your future, about what you're working on. And from that basis, we can say, okay, the first job here is not for us to make sense of this data. The first job is that you have to make sense of it. This is the story you're living in, whether it's the story you thought you were in or not. And we spent a day and a half in a room with leaders and their teams, having them mine that data and work that data purely for the psychological process of ownership. of you making sure you understand you own the story. We will come behind that with, here's our take on this. We have a point of view based on comparing you to lots of other companies and what we think this is telling you, but we won't ever do that first. Most consultants come in and give you the answer, right? They're just study and recommend. We're not that firm. We're the ones that are going to raise the harder questions for you and make you own the story of the change ahead of you. Because change begins in the very first interview. It doesn't begin when we unveil a plan. The minute we start poking around, people are talking, stuff's happening.
Yeah.
So by doing that, I have then opened up a little bit of a wider door so that when I have points of view, the client is already opted into, I expect you to say hard things to me. I expect that not everything you bring to me is going to be easy for me to absorb. Doesn't excuse me from having to do a good job timing or calibrating how ready you are to hear something particularly painful, or for me to challenge or poke you on a behavior or a choice that might really upend your view of the world, or lead you to have to reframe something more discontinuously than you might otherwise have. But from the outset of our relationship, you will have become accustomed to the fact that I'm going to bring you information and data that's going to be unsettling. And I tell my clients all the time, I'm a surrogate. You shouldn't need me to do this. In the future, you have to gauge your own leadership by a very simple metric. If you don't have somebody coming into your office on a regular basis saying things directly to you that make you uncomfortable, be very confident your leadership sucks. Because rest assured, they're telling somebody. It might not be you, but you have to ask yourself, where's that information going? Because you need it. And whether it makes you comfortable or not is irrelevant. It's critical to you making the choices you have to make to run your business.
There's so much here that I want to follow up on. There's a threat because I think it's clear to me, and I'll just ask for your confirmation or clarification on it, but it's clear to me that your work in writing, in the books that you've written, come from this work that you do every day and the reflections that you have on doing it. I mean, I can see that direct tie-in. Is that a fair statement? Like that's you wrote those books because of what you saw, and I could kind of piece that together better now than I could 10 minutes ago, right? And so given that he's nodding for everyone who's just listening to the audio, he's nodding to that point. So I'll keep going. But there's a thread here, and I'm fascinated by like understanding the timing piece is a function of strategy and change management, and recognizing that being too harsh or being too extreme too quickly can create fractures instead of a changing and a bending that is productive. But then there's also this tremendous thread around authenticity is the word that just keeps coming into my mind in every stretch. And I mean, if we look at, your latest book, To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose, to me, authenticity is a subtext to all of that. Is that, I mean, I have to imagine that that's an accurate statement as well.
Well, I'm going to say yes with an asterisk, Anthony. Okay. That word, so many of our language today gets hijacked and gets bastardized. I have an understanding of what I think authenticity means in terms of genuineness. What I see is what I get. There's not another version of you lurking in the background somewhere. But you're seeing all these articles now on that. You're seeing this backlash around when you shouldn't be authentic, or sometimes you can be too authentic, or authenticity doesn't always serve you well. And when you double click on what they're talking about, and it just frustrates me. I just actually read a manuscript of somebody who wrote a book who asked me to pre-read it, and there's this whole authenticity backlash in it. But when you see what they're talking about, they're saying things like, a leader who chose to personally disclose some weaknesses that probably was an overshare. Or you chose to be your authentic self and give your authentic opinion about your boss's bad work. Or things like that. I'm like, those are not examples of authenticity. Those are examples of stupidity. Those are examples of somebody who couldn't read the room, or somebody who had no sense of, didn't understand boundaries. they're not wobbles of authenticity, of being too authentic. Um,
Mhm.
and if you look at the neuroscience about where those misses come from, somebody's trying to purchase intimacy with some level of vulnerability that's inappropriate, right?
Right.
Um, so all I have to say is I want to categorize authenticity as something that is a level of self honesty about, I'm not. I can read the room and I can moderate and adjust how I speak, how I come across, depending on my audience, depending on what I'm trying to get done in the room, depending on who's in the room, for sure, within means. But there's a
Mhm.
point at which that level of modulation becomes chameleon-like, where now I'm actually play acting. I'm sort of putting on the version of Ron I think you want to see, or putting on the version of Ron that thinks I'll get what I'm trying to get at. And that's the line over which authenticity crosses into disingenuousness. And I can do it with a
Mhm.
smile.
Mhm.
I can do it with a lot of polish. I can do it with a lot of flair and the appearance of authenticity. Um,
Mhm.
but that's at some point that will come back to bite you.
That's a really interesting take on authenticity that I would tend to agree with. I really like that self honesty is so key to this, and the it just gets me thinking that authenticity isn't something you do for someone else or do to someone else. It's something that you do for yourself or to yourself, and are earnest about that. And the notion of like purchasing intimacy is another term. I like that. I haven't heard that before, and I think that's really interesting how people can try to manipulate under the guise of authenticity what ends up becoming the very opposite of what authenticity is really supposed to be, which like you described is being disingenuous. It's so interesting to think about how authenticity, or this layer of authenticity as a mask, actually creates the exact opposite of authenticity. And I could see where, like, as it's that word has been thrown around so much, how it's become something that it's really not supposed to be. So that I find that very interesting. And so it leads us to the question that I really want to ask you around. um you mentioned early in the conversation how there are circumstances in which people have a tendency to start behaving in ways that are motivated more purely by self-interest, or by something that is an undesirable approach or behavior set compared to what the organization or what the overall desire and mission of that collective group would be. Can you talk a little bit more about that, especially in light of what we were just talking about with authenticity? I'm really curious about this.
Well, I think, let me see how I would answer that, Anthony. So a lot to unpack in there. Uh, well, look, I think all of us, what we found in the research, to be honest, is that most self-interest is really not for self-gain. It's really for self-protection, right?
Hmm.
There's another motive behind it. When I ask leaders to think about their own honesty, and we define honesty, by the way, as truth, justice, and purpose. Today, you won't get labeled trustworthy for not just for not lying.
Hmm.
Today, trustworthiness is a far higher bar to earn, because our experience of it, if you just look around not too far, it's in a free fall. The
Hmm.
Atlantic wrote an article a few months ago called, that we're in a trust recession. And so, today it's about saying the right thing, doing the right thing, and saying and doing the right thing for the right reason: truth, justice, and purpose. So, one of the ways we all have to face ourselves and be more honest is start with the places that bring us to our dishonesty. The University of Massachusetts says that on average, we all lie about twice a day.
Hmm.
If and whether that's be lying your values, or embellishing a piece of information for your boss's sake, or withholding a piece of feedback you think is going to hurt somebody's feelings, quote unquote. If I were to ask anybody, any of your listeners, to sort of look back over the last 8 or 10 days of your life and tell me about 8 points in time where you were less than honest, whether it was you were snarky to a Starbucks barista, whether you ignored your kids, whether you saw a bunch of packages on the steps your spouse wanted you to carry upstairs and you just walked over them willingly, whether you know, told somebody to take a slide out of a deck because you were afraid it was going to hurt you from getting the budget you asked for. Pick it. You will find an absolute pattern, right? These will not be 8 or 10 random moments. You will see a very clear pattern of the kinds of conditions and contexts that bring you to your dishonesty. And if I were to ask you, how did you learn that? How did you learn that those choices in those situations were going to meet some need you believed you had, even though likely that wasn't the case? You would be able to identify that. That's learned behavior. All of us choose our less than best self behavior when we believe we're threatened, when we believe we want to engineer a certain response from somebody, when we're trying to avoid a certain response from somebody else, when we want to be seen in a certain light. And each of us has our collection of choices that are, you know, reflexive. They're not conscious, that we don't even realize we're doing, that we reach for in those kinds of moments. And if you want to level up your own sense of honesty, you first have to face those moments. So sometimes that's an authenticity issue. Sometimes it's I will not show people my true self. There's part of me I keep hidden. There are part of me, you know, there's a big difference between being private and being secret. Mm-hmm. And we often like to excuse our secrets as if they're private. But the reality is our secrets will eventually, you know, catch up with us. The things we try and, you know, it's like holding sand in your hands at the beach. The harder you squeeze it, the faster it falls out of your hand. So all I have to say is all of us can do better. All of us have a place in our life where we're not showing up to be the best version of ourselves, where the trustworthiness we think we have earned, we actually haven't. We all take for granted the fact that, you know, hey, I'm a good person. I don't hurt people. I'm not a pathological liar. So why wouldn't they trust me? And my question is always, well, do you know why would they trust you? Just because you think they should doesn't mean they do. And if you are in a profession, or if you want to be in any kind of serious relationship with anybody of meaning in your life, you cannot take your trustworthiness for granted. You have to turn over all the rocks of any kind that could be impeding that. I had a client last year who I had to bring feedback to, and this was a good guy. He was smart, sharp. He was not one of the jerks, but his team he lost their trust. And I said, does it surprise you to hear that they've struggled to trust you? And he got really defensive. He said, well, how could they not trust me? I've never been dishonest with them. I'm transparent. I show them all the good and the bad and the ugly. I listen to their ideas. I include them on decisions. I said, well, apparently there's these two behaviors that are troublesome to them. Well, there's probably more than that, but these are the two that came up. One is when you're in meetings and people are less than crisp and articulate, or they're kind of struggling to make their point, you become dismissive and you cut them off. And other cases, when you hear something that you aren't sure you agree with, you become sarcastic, a little bit mocking. What you have told people in those two behaviors is you're not safe. And he said, well, he got, again, a little bit dismissive. And he goes, well, everybody has a bad day. I said, well, apparently you have a lot of them. And that's a perfect example of the fact that you think that that's what that is. The fact of the matter is, trust is in the eye of the beholder. And you have told people you are not a safe place for them to be imperfect. So you have told them, hide that stuff from me and bring me the finished goods. Well, what that means is that they're going to hide a lot of things from you. Mm-hmm. He would have never correlated those, what he would have assumed was like personality quirks, or he would have found some other category for them, but certainly not label them as trust impeding behaviors. But in fact, they were.
And I imagine that those behaviors then, kind of to your statement around how this is learned behavior, the team then is effectively encouraged to be less trustworthy themselves, because they're going to see that by acting that way, or in other ways that are withholding intentionally, that's how they need to operate in that environment. Is that what happens?
Sure. You're training people all the time on how to come to you, right? If you don't have people coming into your office on a regular basis saying things that make you uncomfortable, you really have to ask yourself why. People are telling stories about you as their leader around their dinner tables every night. If you don't know what stories they're telling, you should want to get in on the conversation, because they may not be great stories. Another simple litmus test. Take your values or your mission statement or your purpose statement, any of the promises your organization has made about its identity, bring them into the room of your team and say, how are we doing against these? How am I doing against these? Because what we know from the research is that if there's a say-do gap between the promises you make and the behaviors, you're 3 times more likely to have people lie and cheat. But if there's a say-do alignment, if you are who you say you are, you're 3 times more likely to have people tell you the truth and behave honestly. Ask them, if somebody followed our team around with a video camera all day long and videotaped us, could they use that video as a training program to train people in these values?
That's an interesting thought. That really exposes it, right? Because now you're not just saying, here are the values and looking for evidence of it. You're now saying, okay, here's our activities, and are you in alignment, or are you acting in alignment with what those values actually are? And so that I could see how that would be really useful. I'm curious from your research, it kind of going back to the example that you had around the person who thought he had personality quirks or what have you, turned out to be a significant trust challenge in terms of trustworthiness. How much of trustworthiness is based on action versus intent? So if I want to be a trustworthy person, I think that's a precondition to the actions, and then the actions drive most of whether I really am. But I'm curious, what from your perspective, how did those balance, or is one not as? I assume one's not as important, but
well, one is very dangerous. So we all assume that we're given credit for our good intentions. I intend to be trustworthy. I intend to be kind. I intend to be, forthcoming with information. And nobody cares about your intentions. You do not get extra credit for good intentions, right? If your gap between intentions and impact is too wide, there's no hall pass for that. So it's all of our jobs to calibrate with feedback, with data, with reliable sources of people who have a front row seat to our behavior, that our impact matches our intentions. But we often don't, and it is so critical that we not just rely on our good intentions as the ultimate arbiter for how others experience us, because they can't read your mind. And in fact, there's almost a reverse correlation, Anthony. A lot of times people, if there's a behavioral gap between your intentions and your impact, they will reverse engineer a set of attributions to the bad behavior that had nothing to do with what you thought. They'll make up if they can't explain some bad behavior that you're displaying, they'll make up a reason for it, and they'll attribute a motive to you that is far from who you are, and you might not ever find out.
Yeah. That I could see exactly why that happened. And I'm thinking, I often myself look at that differential between what I would intend and what I wanted to have happen, or my set of expectations for myself, and then what I really did, or what I really had, and where did I not live up to my own intent, or did I do something that was in misalignment with what is important to me from a values perspective? Because you're the only one who can see both your intent and your actions in perfect clarity if you take the time to consider them both. Everyone on the outside can see your actions and has to infer your intent based on your actions.
Well, and the one caveat I would say from Astor's point of view is, you have to be honest about your intentions and your actions, right? You can see them clearly, right, but you may not be honest about them, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's one thing to sort of compare and contrast them, but you have to take an honest look at at, what did you really want out of that experience, or what were you really trying to accomplish with that person? Why would it have blown up and gone sideways so badly?
Right. Right. So we've been talking about kind of like this micro level where we're talking about one person, one individual's intent, one team, or what have you. And I think about how this expands to the context of an organization and whether an organization can be trustworthy. And like, because I imagine any organization of any scale is going to have people that fall onto a continuum at different places of trustworthiness. What can an organization do to promote being more trustworthy as an organization? Or is that even a fallacy of a concept? Can organizations be trustworthy? And then two, what should an organization do to be trustworthy if it's possible?
Well, so the entire basis of our research, we're looking at systemic factors, right? So we found 4 in the research that can predict whether or not an organization's trustworthiness will be strong or if they will be seen as untrustworthy. So one of them was be who you say you are. Make sure there's no say-do gap between the promises you make. One of them was accountability. If your accountability systems are seen as fair and just, you are 4 times more likely to have people be honest. But if people feel like the game is rigged, if they feel like their contributions are treated as a cog in a wheel, then you're 4 times more likely to have them be dishonest. Decision-making, governance. People walk into meetings and they feel like it's orchestrated theater. If the decision was already made, and the last thing you want to hear from me is a dissenting point of view, you're 3.5 times more likely to have people be dishonest. But if I walk into that room and I feel like there's a balanced point of view of the data being presented, that my healthy dissent is welcome, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people be honest. And lastly, cross-functional rivalries. If the seams of your organization are stitched well, and the healthy tensions between sales and marketing, supply chain operations are held well, and there's a place for that conflict to be resolved, you're 6 times, it's a huge influencer, 6 times more likely to have people be honest. But if there's border wars, if there's no place for the healthy tensions to go, they have to go underground, and you have a lot of tribalism, a lot of we's and they's, pointing fingers, and there's a lot of people in people's color IDs where they're making them go, oh, what do they want? Now you're 6 times more likely to have people be dishonest, because now when you fragment the organization, you now fragment the truth, and now you have dueling truths, dueling data sets, right? My facts versus your facts. So it's cumulative, Anthony. So if you are good at all those things, you are 16 times more likely to have people show up to your organizations with a notion of telling the truth and behaving fairly and serving a greater good. But if you suck at all of them, you are 16 times more likely to find yourself in the headline of a newspaper story you never wanted to be in.
That is amazing. I mean, it makes so much sense as you break it down and relay it, but to have that kind of 16 times impact, that's an enormous impact to ultimately the success of your organizations. And so we're just about out of time. And I know I've been just kind of peppering you with questions. We've been going down rabbit holes and tangents or whatever. Do you have anything else that like the audience should know based on some of the things that we've talked about today or other areas of work that you're doing? Is there anything else that you want to share or educate the audience on while we're still together this afternoon?
Well, the one thing I want people to understand is that trustworthiness is a muscle. It's not a character trait. It's not something we sprinkle pixie dust on and have or don't have. It's like going to the gym. You have to work at it every day. It's a muscle. You have to build it, and you shouldn't take it for granted. Right. If you want to get a little bit of a teaser, come to the book's website, tobehonest.net. We have a How Honest Is My Team assessment. You can take a quick assessment about what's happening in the construct of your own group that you work in to see just how much of a skinny you're really getting.
This is amazing. And I think what's so exciting about the work that you do, and obviously you spend a lot of your time coaching and working with senior executives in very large organizations, but the lessons here are completely relevant to the small business owner, to the team leader, to the individual practitioner, to everyone, really everyone out there can benefit from understanding this and continuing to think about and researching this particular facet of data leadership and of just, being an effective professional in the workplace. I think it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. So Ron, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this wisdom. It's been amazing.
Anthony, a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for joining us today. As always, you'll find more information about our guests and links in the show notes. Go to dataleadershiplessons.com to subscribe and check out past episodes and accelerate your journey with training at dataleadershiptraining.com. Stay safe during these unusual times and go make an impact.